call entitled Marketing Best Practices for Emerging Managers. I am Robert Atkinson, COO of NYAIR Asset Securities USA. We are delighted to be joined by Holly Singer. Holly is president and founder of HS Marketing, LLC, a marketing communications public relations firm specializing in the alternative investment community. Her professional experience over the past 2 decades has been focused on enhancing the branding communications capabilities and industry awareness of investment managers and service providers. Holly also serves as a board member of the Hedge Fund Association, otherwise known as HFA, and she has been a speaker at numerous industry seminars and conferences and has authored articles for various publications. So welcome, Holly. But before we get into the Q&A, I do want to acknowledge the continuing support of our sponsors, without whose support these calls would not be possible. Of course, we're talking about Alston Bird, Baker Tilly, Bloomberg, BNY Mellon, Deloitte, Ferential Systems, Grant Thornton, New Mountain Capital, Benesch, as well as Kaya. So without further ado, and I just want to call people's attention to Holly's contact information here on this slide. I do want to welcome Holly and greet you. So good afternoon, Holly.
Hello, Bob. Hello, attendees. And first, I would just like to make a note of thanks again to Bob Atkinson and Murray for inviting me here today to speak at this webinar. Many thanks to the New York Alternative Investment Roundtable and all of your sponsors for making this possible. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Terrific, Holly. And before we dive into the Q&A, because I know we've got some exciting topics to cover here, I do want to make one housekeeping announcement, and that is that we're going to be saying goodbye to Britt Tunick. And I just want to thank Britt. Britt has been enormously helpful to us in conducting these calls over the, I guess it's almost 2 years that we've been, at least that I've been involved. So I do want to say thank you to Britt. And I also want to welcome Kimberly Biven, and Kimberly is going to be the new coordinator. So thanks to Britt, and welcome to Kimberly. And on that note, let's dive in, Holly. So, Holly, what's the difference between marketing, advertising, and branding? We hear these terms thrown around rather loosely. So can you give us a little bit of, or a greater deal of clarity here?
Sure, I'd be glad to. And as Bob suggested, these 3 terms seem to be used interchangeably, and particularly in our space in the investment services arena, but they are distinct. And what I'd like to do is just quickly clarify what I see as some of their differences, and while they do overlap, there are some differences among them. First, with regard to marketing is how you see yourself, but advertising is really how you act in public. And I'd like to suggest that branding is how others see you. So branding is all about perception. Perception's really the driving force in how firms articulate their messaging and develop their public presence. So these are 3 related but not equivalent concepts. And if anyone's interested in kind of a deeper dive, I'm happy to share some pieces that I've read on this subject and the comparison between the 2. I came across in an interesting article. Again, I'm happy to share those.
Okay, so we have a lot of representatives from the buy side here. So when do you think is the best time to initiate a marketing campaign? Is it during the launch stage? Is it after the business has been up and running? What do you think?
My short answer is as soon as possible. So we've worked with over 100 firms in the alternative space. Many of them are managers. Many of them are pre-launch or early post-launch. And in most of these cases, I do get asked this question, what is the best time? So what I would like to suggest is a quick note of or a suggestion to remember that first impressions become lasting impressions. So spend the time to be ready and prepare before you go out and solicit from what might be a seed capital source or an important founding investor, since they will remember who you are and what you do. So where do you start? First, make sure you have a strategy. Pull that together, organize your communication tools. I suggest you do this before and not after you set up these meetings with these prospective clients or investors, and include those that you think you may already know. They might be your low-hanging fruit, but again, you do want to make a really good impression with them. So that marketing activity should be initiated as early as possible, again, before you technically or fully go into a launch mode. And I would also suggest to initiate that marketing activity and process as smartly as possible, since your time is limited. So what do you do there? Make sure that your target investors are going to be suitable investors, and identify how you might meet them to develop those relationships, and know what their allocation criteria are, again, so that you use your time effectively. Start early, but start smartly, and make sure that your targets are pretty well matched to their investment criteria instead of a mismatch, so that you can get up the curve as quickly as possible.
And Holly, let me ask a follow-up question to this question, and maybe circle back to the first question. What is the difference, in your view, between sales and marketing?
Sure, good question, and I think that's another typical source of confusion. So they're overlaps, but they're distinct. So sales involves the process of developing business, meeting, greeting, going through the process of identifying and meeting with investors. And I use the word meeting broadly because, you know, we're in a digital era, and your meet and greet may begin in the cloud and then evolve to face-to-face and in-person, which is critical, but may not be the first place to meet and greet. So that process, that sales process in which you are making your pitch and establishing a relationship and hopefully getting from the initial relationship development to a closing of a transaction, is closely related to but distinct from your marketing process. So the marketing process, Bob, to answer your question, is really focused on what you do to wrap around and support and enhance the sales process. And what does that mean? The marketing process is coming up with your strategy. Who are you identifying as your prospects? How long will it take them? What are their investment criteria? What's their allocation process? And what are the tools that you're developing to, again, enhance your sales process? So the marketing is the collection of activities, communication tools, message development and message outreach that will enhance your sales process. And
plan, the overarching plan.
And absolutely, to have a plan and make sure that your plan is realistic. Reality check is, sounds trite, but that's often overlooked.
Okay, and so is it fair to say that marketing really is more of a strategic domain, whereas sales is a bit more tactical? It's the execution in some respects of the marketing campaign.
Actually, a little of each. I wouldn't agree with that in total, because marketing is strategic and tactical.
Okay.
So the tactical side of marketing is the execution of your strategy. So it's critical that you have a strategy and you've identified in a big picture where you want to go and what your roadmap is. But if you don't execute that roadmap, you're sunk. So
Sure.
quick example is I've actually heard investors at industry events when they're asked what a manager sometimes overlooks, and believe it or not, one of the things they cite is managers forget to follow up. So you meet someone, you collect their card, you're at a meet and greet, a cocktail, or a one-on-one meeting or an event, and you don't follow up. Now that's part of that's not strategic, that's tactical.
Yes.
That's actually sales and marketing. So the tactical side involves the sales, make a follow-up phone call, but the marketing is, what am I going to send them? How do I follow up?
Yes, I think that's an excellent point. Let me ask one more follow-up question, going back to that first question, marketing, advertising, and branding. Advertising is not a term that we used to see associated with alternative investments, but that's changed, right?
Absolutely.
So how do you see, how would you describe, or what is the best business practice, would you think, for approaching advertising if you're an alternative manager and you want to use media to get your message out?
Okay, great. That's a loaded question, and I'm going to start by a little disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a compliance expert. I don't provide legal advice. I encourage everybody to embrace the regulations, hug an attorney, ask them for their opinion, and follow their advice. So that said, what I can share is from my industry travels.
Thank you.
Yeah. So advertising, you're absolutely right, Bob. Advertising has changed, enormously, certainly in the last decade and even the last 5 years. And in order to be compliant, managers who are not registered, it's federally registered, my understanding is they cannot advertise their funds. So you are not advertising on a product-specific basis.
Okay.
You are also not advertising your firm directly unless you have gone under the fee exemption from the Jobs Act. And again, you need to check with your attorney about how that works and whether they recommend you do that. Almost no managers have done that. So that's just a fact, but I'm not going to weigh in on the whys and wherefores.
And I think that's a very interesting observation in and of itself, that notwithstanding the Jobs Act, there aren't a lot of managers who are using advertising.
Yeah, that's correct. So, and again, separately, I'm happy to provide some further clarity on that, but very few managers are registering properly and then to advertise, which is that C option under the Jobs Act. And I maintain, honestly, that given the tight restrictions on investment suitability for private funds, that managers are far better in terms of their budget, their time, and their potential success in focusing on what I call thought leadership, which I think we're going to get to.
Yes, yes. So let's start talking about presentation, okay? I think you've alluded to that throughout your comments. What's a good definition of presentation? What does presentation mean?
Sure. I would actually use that word in the singular and plural. So presentation is who you are in the singular sense. Your presentation is how you present yourself to the public, which in turn translates into how others see you. That's your branding. So if I'm a manager, I'm focused on how others perceive me, because the better they perceive me, the better my presentation has been. And so on a singular basis, it's do you have the ability and willingness to communicate effectively? That's your presentation capability and execution of how you present yourself. But presentation plural is critical. So I like to use the word marketing toolkit. So what I recommend for managers is that they present themselves with a package, and that's the marketing toolkit.
And so what are the most critical presentation elements, would you say?
Sure. Just to digress for 1 minute, those elements are not a one-size-fits-all for all managers, and they're not a one-size-fits-all at every point in a fund's life cycle. So be flexible, be fluid, and expect to evolve and grow and change with those elements as the fund grows. So to start on day one, the core element is your deck. It's your, it's your pitch book. Revolving around, it's sort of a hub and a spoke, I think is an easy way to think of it. So the hub is your pitch book, that's your deck, and I'll circle back on what I think that must, at a minimum, include. And the second is your tear sheet. So I was just speaking recently at a seminar where one of the allocators was asked what she saw were the most critical marketing tools, and she said tear sheet. That's the first thing I want to see from a manager. The deck is more of a follow-on, because the tear sheet is meant to be 1 page, maybe 2 pages, but it's a 1 to 2 page document. It's a quick view, it's a quick fix. The deck is more extensive. And the third is...
Can I just hold so yeah. Tear sheet, I think that's a key point, right? So typically, what are some of the elements of a tear sheet? Because the tear sheet is meant to be 1 page, it's concise, it kind of tells the whole story, hopefully. It's the elevator pitch in a sense, isn't it?
Not exactly.
Okay.
So I would say I maintain that the elevator pitch is another key presentation element that goes into your marketing toolkit.
And I meant that figuratively, because I mean it's written, not spoken. But what pieces, what information pieces would you recommend be included in that tear sheet?
Okay, so in the tear sheet, which I'd like to separate actually from the elevator pitch and yep. Take a minute separately on that, which I think is a verbal message. So in the tear sheet, it needs to look attractive and have a content, an objective content focus. And one of the voids that I have often seen, actually 2 voids I've often seen, so while we're on tear sheet, to avoid. Make sure that you include, these are things that, believe it or not, have been missing from some that I've seen. One is a description of the strategy. So, why would someone invest with you if they just see a bunch of numbers and they don't even know what you do as your strategy? And the second, believe it or not, common void is a name and contact information. So I get a tear sheet from someone and it has a gazillion metrics, but it doesn't even say who the main contact is at the firm and how I can reach them.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting.
Elevate, can we take a minute on
yeah,
elevator?
Please.
So again, with the marketing toolkit, your deck is critical, your tear sheet is at least as critical, if not more. And thirdly, the elevator pitch. So if you go out to meet someone at an event, and especially if you're part of a team from a manager, you should all be singing the same tune and have the same basic elevator pitch. So your deck might be 15, 20 slides at the absolute maximum, but your elevator pitch should be what you could verbally streamline as an overall message in probably 2 or 5 minutes. And I like to think that there's sort of 2 quick scripts. One is the 2-minute version, and the other is the 5+ minute version that just gives a very, very brief overview. But that's verbal. So if you don't have that, I definitely recommend that you have a script and know how to introduce yourself in a really short time frame.
Okay, that makes imminent sense. So you and I have also talked quite a bit about thought leadership and why you think it's important. So why is thought leadership a big deal?
Yeah, thought leadership is a term that's being increasingly used. I think it's also bandied about sometimes excessively, but it really is important and it really is critical. So Bob, Bob's asking why is it important? It goes right into why investors care enough to take a second meeting and consider actually making an allocation. It's about trust. It's about those sort of soft but critical areas of your capabilities. So it's not about your fund's rate of return. It's not the alpha you've created in your portfolio. It's about your insights and your expertise, because those elements are building blocks for building trust with investors. And here's an example. If you're investing in, let's say you're a global macro manager and you're investing across asset classes and you have a view of either the markets or maybe monetary policy or what's going on, between, currencies or whatever trends are happening in the markets, those are key nuggets that make up your thought leadership capabilities. And one of the reasons that an investor may take you more seriously or get to the next meeting or further along in your sales cycle is because he or she is learning from you and getting to a higher level of trust because you've shared your opinion on the market, on market trends. Or let's say you got hit with, the volatility crisis back in February, and you can explain something about the market structure with certain futures contracts or rate, declines and increases and things that happen in the market that affected your strategy, and you can educate the investor about certain terminology and market behavior. That's thought leadership.
So is thought leadership expressed both verbally and in writing, or is it more a verbal exercise?
It's both. And what I mean by that is you can express your thought leadership one-to-one. If you're in a meeting with someone and they say, oh, Holly, what really happened on those markets? I didn't get a good grasp. Could you give me kind of a, volatility 101? Your thought leadership is your ability to distill that information. So it might be one-on-one in a meeting. So clearly, if you write something, I would just advise or caution you to be, on top of whatever that information is. If you have a byline on an article or something and someone calls you on it. So it could be verbal. It can also be an article. So thought leadership is often expressed in some kind of an article, and that would be written. And the third is multimedia. So, we're in the video space and the YouTube generation, and to the extent that you can articulate your thought leadership and those views, in a video, like a speaker takeaway, that's a great thing to do as well.
So let's go back to written for a second, and I'm just curious to get your opinion on the value potentially of using LinkedIn as a way to communicate thought leadership. Is that a shotgun or a rifle, or is that a waste of time? What do you think?
What do I think? I like to look at the what I call the distribution channels holistically. So more is better than nothing. More is better than just a few. And different folks will receive and digest their news and their information from different sources. LinkedIn is one of them. So I definitely encourage you to use LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is sort of the Wild West. It's just like an open playing field. So if you're creating thought leadership, what I would recommend for you to get heard, because it's one thing to create content, it's another thing to disseminate it. So, Bob, you just mentioned LinkedIn. I think that's one of several channels.
And what are some others?
So other channels, as maybe broad, but not as sort of, unencumbered would be Harvest is another one. There are other, that's an aggregator. Another aggregator is Hedge Connection, has a large ecosystem in the alternative investment space. HedgeCo also has a distribution channel. And then in addition to those, don't disregard other forms of social media. Twitter is a huge news channel, and I know there are regulatory restrictions, but Twitter is a very important place to be for thought leadership. Websites for, different organizations, if you're, involved with different, industry groups that also put together newsletters that have blogs. Blogs are actually a form of social media, and to the extent that some blogs have more subscribers than others, again, my recommendation is to go as broadly as you can and to get your information on thought leadership out via different channels. Now that, and just one quick comment to digress, is those channels are very different from the distribution channels for your fund-specific information, which those go through databases. I just want to clarify. Those databases are totally different from the qualitative thought leadership type channels where you can disseminate your information.
So just say that again.
Okay, so there's two types of
thought leadership versus, let's say, information about your performance.
Quantitative versus qualitative, if we just put it into those two branches. So quantitative distribution, and that should be a big part of your marketing strategy, involves a whole host of databases, and I have the same approach and set of recommendations broadly. Go broadly versus narrowly. Don't just disseminate to one database. So your marketing should include sharing your fund data on many databases. With regard to thought leadership, the channels are different, but I also recommend a broad-based approach. And, with the help of PR firms, you might be able to elicit a discussion of some of your thought leadership ideas on some traditional media platforms as well.
So you mentioned public relations firms, okay? It strikes me that one of the benefits that a public relations firm brings to the table is that we're overloaded with information, right? We can't get away from it. It's in the paper, it's on the internet. What can a PR firm do to help a manager or anyone else for that matter to hone their message, to make sure that their meaningful thought leadership isn't overlooked, isn't lost in the noise of everything else that's going on? What things can a PR firm do to help that thought leader distinguish themselves?
Sure. Thanks for that question. That's a good one. I would like to suggest that there are, again, kind of two very complementary areas of raising visibility. One is at a firm level, and that's part of your branding, and another is more at the thought leadership level. And, in PR, we would recommend both. So quick example of each. So at the firm level, if your firm has extended its team, that's just a quick example of a newsworthy announcement. So at the firm level, the criteria to get noticed would be something newsworthy. That would be some information to announce that you'd like to share with the public and with specific media. And then on in the second area, which is in the thought leadership space, there's a couple things. One is to, author an article and invite various media outlets to publish the article. Depending on the media outlet, and PR firms are generally acquainted with what their criteria are per outlet, depending on the media outlet, they may or may not accept a bylined article, and they may or may not be, open to publishing information pertaining to managers. Again, some of them have criteria that may restrict their interest to just, certain types of information or certain types of managers.
Well, I'll just throw this out there. I've noticed from time to time op-ed pieces in the Wall Street Journal written by hedge fund managers. Now, the op-ed pieces don't address the strategy, per se, of that manager, but they talk about a topic that I, as I recall, is somewhat related to what they do, which is their basis of expertise, right? So, but I suppose that's a bit of a reach, thinking that you're going to have an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or a publication like that.
Short answer is correct.
Yeah.
Longer answer is that one of the things you just mentioned, Bob, is this, there's this regulatory quagmire. So again, many firms, especially if they're not big enough to be SEC registered, have to be really, really careful on what they put out there to the public. So talking about your strategy is no-go. So totally forget that. Take that off the table.
But as you said, thought leadership is separate and distinct.
Thought leadership is different, but again, that's really to be widely published, like in a Wall Street Journal level of media, name and media brand. They're super selective. That's probably not applicable to a small emerging manager. Those managers, and we've all seen them, are generally the largest in the industry. They're the biggest, they're the most well-known, and by sort of being agile in what they're going to say and avoiding any discussion of strategy and direct product or firm, promotion, they're within the regs and they can move forward. And again, that acceptance of those op-ed pieces, because that's at the discretion of the media outlet, is more likely to be realistic for probably the top 10%.
Right. So what else should we know about thought leadership? What didn't we cover? I mean, I guess we could say, where does one start?
Sure. Well, I think the best place to start, so let me answer that question, start at the beginning. And the beginning is, who do you know best? So your thought leadership, even though you may say, oh, my investors already know what I know, or they know that stuff about the markets, those existing investors, those are your current clients. Those are the low-hanging fruit, and those are the folks that are going to be really your best source of referral, so don't neglect them. Treat them with kid gloves. So on a tactical level, what I would recommend doing as a starting point is to create that content and use that with an investor letter. That goes out by email. And that's something that should be catchy, it should be informative, but it shouldn't be a boat anchor. And what's a boat anchor? A boat anchor is too much information.
Okay.
It should be concise, but informative. So you start with that. Email is something that goes to the folks that already know you, and then you can also expand on that to go out to other, what I would call some information aggregators. And again, be selective, because something that's just widespread, in a public place may help your SEO, search engine optimization, sorry for the acronym, but it's really more valuable to be heard and seen in a space that overlaps with your target audience. Quality, not quantity.
And I think you hit on a very important point there, at least a very intriguing point, Holly, and that is that I think what you were suggesting is sometimes less is more. And to that point, let me ask you this. Something like the format of the written message, using bullet points as opposed to prose. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I do.
Okay, and what are they?
I do, and if you don't mind, I want to include in my sort of format and length comments some recommendations for managers' marketing materials, because
Please.
I think that's front and center on a lot of people's mind. And I have, in my industry travels and clientele and review of materials, seen everything. And I'm a big believer in less is more. So, you know, a 40-page deck that someone sends to me and says, but I need to keep it all because it's all so important. Take a deep breath, look in the mirror, think about being in the shoes of your prospect and whether they really have the time, the interest, and the appetite to flip through, sit through, hear, or read that much content. Not that you don't know your stuff or you haven't spent a lot of time in it, and I know, and I've been through this many times, I know a lot of folks have a hard time parting with what they've created because they've built it. It's their blood, sweat, and tears. But you really need to kind of spin around and put yourself in the shoes of your prospect.
So in a sense, circling back to the topic that you're talking about, thought leadership. In a sense, thought leadership is really a means to an end, right? It's a way to open the door,
yeah.
right? So by
or keep it open. It's either opening the door or keeping it open, because just a quick what do you mean by keeping it open? If I've been sending my updated performance report to you, if you're my allocator prospect or one of my prospects month in and month out, and I'm not getting any hits, but things have happened in the market, so I have definite opinions. What do I do to get off the slush pile? What do I do to get your attention? Well, that's where thought leadership comes in. So in addition to all of those quantitative, the metrics that I'm sending you to hopefully sway you to making that allocation, I need to have something else to say.
Sure.
I need to have another discussion point. I need
another reason to speak.
Exactly, to speak, to write, to reach out and touch base with someone. And that's where this comes in. And if you could do it, not so much that you're going to be shut out, but maybe it's quarterly. Maybe there's something you can do on a quarterly basis with your opinion about some trends in the market, or if you're in a specific space, something in a very niche strategy that's had some structural change or further demand, and you could explain that'll go over well.
Yes, very interesting.
And it's something else to put you in front of people besides NAV or rate of return. It's not a metric. It's a little more of your personality and expertise. Yes,
and when we talk about the importance of brevity, I'm reminded of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, right? So it was, 2 minutes long, and he was supposed to be the warm-up, the setup speaker for someone who was about to deliver a 5 or 6 hour speech, and we don't even remember who that guy was, but we remember Lincoln's 2 minutes, 2 minutes that shaped the world. But I guess there is a certain genius that goes into being able to deliver important messages with few words.
Short is good. So you need to answer 3 questions in your, presentation materials. Who are you? What do you do? And what's your edge? How do you differentiate yourself? If you don't respond or address those 3 questions, you're not delivering what the investor wants. And of course, there's a deep dive in each of those areas. But that's
so. I think what you're alluding to are traps that we maybe fall into from time to time. So, what are some common marketing traps that we encounter, and what can we do to remedy them?
I'm going to address that from my industry travel. So I don't have a database of traps or a thought leadership on that, but having seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, I just like to share a few quick.
Marketing in general, right? So,
yeah, of course. Unfortunately, one of the traps that I think managers fall into very frequently is just not having a marketing budget. So they launch a fund, or maybe they, plan to relaunch, or, target, an increased, asset raise, and they don't have a budget. They're just thinking of, creating the alpha and putting their portfolio together. And then they're very frustrated when they don't see a meaningful inflow of new investors. So three traps. So one is that, absence of budget. The second is, unrealistic investor targets. And the third is over focus on performance metrics as their message leads. So I could do a little bit of a dive into the second and the third.
Please.
Okay. Great. So why are managers unrealistic? Because that is a trap that I hear all the time. I think that happens because, a lot of folks say, well, I'm going after institutions. But honestly or realistically, for managers in their early or emerging stages of their life cycle, they're not going to meet the criteria. They're not going to have enough years and months of track record. They're not going to have the AUM. They are not in a position to present the infrastructure that's required. They're not going to have the building blocks that those institutions require. So what do? You take a deep breath, swallow hard, and try a dose of reality. So that trap of having the sort of mismatch in investors, I think sets managers back when they could be more successful. So instead of trying to develop relationships with seeders, with family offices, with high net worth investors, which are more apt to actually invest, many managers think they're just going to leapfrog that whole part of the life cycle, and that's frustrating, and then that sets them back, and their AUM doesn't get to anywhere near what they want. And many managers are defensive about why, for example, they won't consider first loss, or they won't consider revenue share, or they won't consider the terms and conditions typically offered by seeders or early stage allocators. But in fact, if they would be more receptive, that would be way more productive for their capital raising objectives.
Can I ask you something? Since we're on this topic, and I think this is related, transparency, right? To what extent should managers be willing to share information about their backgrounds with potential investors? The level of investment they've made in the fund, questions about, let's say, their own financial health and stability. Because one thing I wonder about when I see a startup manager or a smaller manager is this a viable economic concern at this point? And if not, how long will it take? And if I were to place capital now, how long before, is the manager going to be focused on raising money when I'm thinking he's going to be investing money? Do you see what I'm saying? How much dry powder do they have? So are these questions that managers should expect to receive and be prepared to answer crisply?
Absolutely. Big believer in transparency. So I recommend that managers be proactive. So I realize that your, marketing message and your activities are meant to showcase your capabilities and put you in the best light possible. But that's different from hype. And I think a dose of reality will also lead you down a path where you quickly realize that, seeders are expecting, some kind of either an infrastructure or some kind of a team. And if you don't have a team, I don't know how credible you can be.
And so let me just throw this out there. Last week we had a very interesting conversation with Ken Springer, who runs a due diligence firm. And one of the things that I thought was really an eye-opener, and it's called Corporate Resolutions, and he's a former FBI agent and certified fraud examiner. But one of the things he spoke about, and we talked about at length offline, was the extent to which information about our backgrounds are very much available. And sometimes people will ask you a question, and it's really a test. It's a test to see if you're going to be honest, more so than, I did something that wasn't so good in the past, right? But they really want to know, are you going to be truthful? So I guess my question to you as the professional marketer, okay, is how prepared should you be for those types of questions? I mean, you used the term before, look ourselves in the mirror. So I guess all of us at one point or another either have or should be looking ourselves in the mirror, warts and all, right, and be prepared to discuss those warts.
Exactly. So, and I do know Ken Springer and his firm, they do a fabulous job. He's been in this business for many, many years. He knows his stuff. He's a tremendous expert, and he's a thought leader. I totally agree with him, and my response is be prepared for all those warts and those ugly blemishes or whatever they are in your past to come out. And a lot of allocators are paying firms like Ken and others to do a deep dive as part of their due diligence. So at a recent event, one of the allocators was saying she's going to look at your SAT scores. Well, whether you took the SATs in high school 10, 20, 30 or more years ago, that's just one metric. But I think that the bottom line here, the takeaway is be prepared for a deep dive and don't hide anything. And if you have a note in your materials about having graduated from XYZ college or university and it didn't happen, you just took night courses or you studied there for a year or two, you need to fix that right away. I really think that full transparency, it's radical transparency, and you should be prepared for all of those radical questions and not put yourself in a spot, because once you do that and you try to eke your way out of a situation where you're shedding light on untrue information, you're doomed. Don't take that risk. It's not worth it.
So it's interesting to hear your perspective. I think the two perspectives complement each other, right? So what you're counseling is that you should be prepared, and I think what Ken was saying was whether you're prepared or not, they're going to ask those questions. Some people will ask those questions, right, and some people will have conducted their own due diligence on you. So it behooves you to be prepared and to be transparent.
Honest. Be completely candid and transparent and as honest as possible, because the opposite will bite you, and that's just not worth it.
Yes.
Definitely not worth it.
Yes. So Holly, it looks like our time is coming to a close. We're up on 12:50, and I just wanted to know, are there any other key points or topics or themes that we may have overlooked here, or ones that you want to go back to and elaborate on or reinforce before we ask for questions from the audience?
Thank you, Bob. Just very briefly, I would just like to leave people with the comment about that often overlooked trap of leading with performance. I've heard when I've asked managers to tell me what they do, instead of telling me a story about who they are, what they do, they actually start to just spout out performance metrics, and that's like a data dump, whether you do that in person or in writing. That's not an effective way to begin a trust-based relationship. So try to just not avoid sharing your performance, of course, but don't lead with that, and try to tell a story. It's better to have a story to tell. Why are you in this business? What's some really great, unusual facts about you that people can remember? So
okay,
make a story.
So Holly, I do have a question here from the audience, and I just want to remind everyone that if you'd like to ask Holly a question, on the WebEx at the bottom of the page, the bottom right-hand side, you can send a question to the room, or you can send a question to me, and I will make sure that Holly gets it. But one of the questions that we got from the audience, it goes back to this whole issue of common marketing traps, I think. What the audience member is asking here, Holly, is what strategies would you suggest to avoid common marketing traps? what strategies would you suggest to avoid common marketing traps?
Okay, let me try to answer that without being too redundant from what we just discussed. Start early and be very realistic. And be realistic in a couple areas. One that I don't know if I commented on already was the time frame required. So I keep going back to start early because
time frame required
the time frame required for you to have a successful marketing and sales process. I often hear from managers that they thought 6 months they would just, you know, launch fund and have their objective AUM, and it just ends up usually taking a pretty big multiple versus that. So one of the traps is not allocating budget, but also not allocating a realistic time frame to successfully market and raise capital. And how do you avoid that? Going back to thought leadership, you need to be persistent and follow up with folks, but you need to do more than just, you know, send them your rates of return and expect that they may, quote, watch you, because I think that's, you know, I mean, I hear a lot of managers say, you know, I'm sending out my stuff, but I'm just being watched. So the allocators may watch and track you for a lot longer than you expect.
Okay.
You have to be realistic about that.
And Holly, another question has come in concerning operational due diligence. And the question is, to what extent should the manager's marketing material address the issue of operational due diligence? In other words, the extent to which business risk is being addressed by the manager.
Oh, okay, great question. Yes, I definitely think that if you have addressed business risks by building out your infrastructure and initiating risk controls, that's an important marketing attribute. And I definitely recommend that in your marketing deck, in your verbal discussion and presentations, that you communicate. One example would be, you know, what have you done to build out your organization? What kind of risk controls are in place, let's say, for cybersecurity threats? You know, another is what kinds of, you know, depending on the types of assets in your portfolio, what kind of valuation risk could affect you, and what have you done to offset valuation risk? Maybe you've hired an outsourced valuation provider. So those are business risks that a smart allocator will ask about, and I would definitely recommend being proactive and in your materials offer up the steps you've taken or the ways that your firm addresses those.
Okay, and I'm just looking here to see if we have any more questions, and it looks like we don't, and that's perfect because I think we've just about run out of time. So on behalf of the New York Alternative Investment Roundtable, I would like to thank Holly Singer, President and Founder of HS Marketing, for a very interesting and incisive view of marketing best practices for emerging managers. I would also like to remind everyone that if you'd like to ask Holly any follow-up questions, her contact information is at the bottom of the slide here. You see hsmarketing.com, that's her website, and you see her her email address, and she's got a Twitter account. Wow, this is pretty fancy. She also has her telephone number. So again, Holly, thanks so much, and folks, have a good month, and until June. Okay, so we'll talk to you next June.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you to everybody that listened in. I hope it was worthwhile, and I look forward to any further communication.
I for one learned a lot today, so thanks so much, Holly.
My
Bye for now, everyone.